In the quiet village of Willowbrook, nestled between rolling hills and endless fields, lived four sisters who had never known the touch of a man. Their lives were confined within the walls of a dim, creaky farmhouse on the outskirts. A place where the flicker of candlelight was their only companion, and the shadow of their father loomed over every breath they took. The eldest sister had fled years ago, but the remaining three, Margaret, Helen, and the youngest, Sarah, remained, bound by obedience and fear. Sarah was 30, still untouched, having never felt a gentle hand, a tender kiss, or the warmth of an embrace. Their father, Richard, was a strict man whose control extended to every word, every glance, every step. The only moment Sarah tasted freedom was the walk to the village well, a dusty path 300 yards from home. It was there at the well that everything changed. One crisp autumn morning, the sun barely peeking over the hills, Sarah carried the worn bucket down the familiar path. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of damp earth and drying leaves. She reached the well, its stone rim cold beneath her fingers, and began lowering the bucket with the rough, frayed rope. Suddenly, a voice interrupted the silence. "Need a hand with that?" said a man's voice, deep, calm, and unfamiliar. Startled, Sarah looked up to see a stranger standing beside her. He was tall, with broad shoulders and dark hair flecked with silver at the temples. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms sun-kissed by city light rather than farm work. His eyes held a serenity that unsettled her in the best possible way. "No thank you," Sarah stammered, but before she could protest, he reached out and grasped the bucket's handle. Their hands brushed, a fleeting touch, but for Sarah, it ignited a fire she never knew existed. "Oh," she breathed, her cheeks flushing as their fingers lingered a moment longer than necessary. "Here you go," he said, lifting the bucket filled with clear, cold water and handing it to her with a gentle smile. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. He nodded, as if it were no big deal, but Sarah knew this small exchange had shattered something inside her. She took the bucket and started back down the path, her heart pounding so loudly she feared her father might hear it from miles away. As she approached the farmhouse, Richard stood at the doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp as a hawk. "Why so slow?" he barked, his breath smelling faintly of last night's whiskey. Sarah lowered her gaze, clutching the bucket tighter. "Just careful," she muttered. He grunted and slammed the door behind her, shutting out the world she longed to join that night. In the darkness where shadows whispered and the house echoed with her father's drunken rants, Sarah lay awake. Her mind replayed the moment by the well, the stranger's smile, the brush of his hand, the warmth that bloomed and refused to fade. For the first time in 30 years, she dared to dream of a life beyond obedience and silence. Meanwhile, the village buzzed with news. The old neighbor, Mr. Thompson's house, the one beside the well, had been sold to a man from the city. A mysterious man, they said, well-dressed and polite but not one of their own. Whispers floated through the market and the pub. 40-something, they say, won't last a winter here. City folk don't have the stomach for our ways. But to Sarah it was a beacon. She found herself stealing glances toward the newly settled stranger's home, wondering if he was the one who had touched her hand, if this quiet man might be the key to her freedom. That simple morning at the well had altered the course of her life forever, setting her on a path where fear battled hope, and where a single touch promised a world of possibilities yet to be discovered. And yet, beneath the promise, a shadow lurked. A secret in the stranger's past that even the village's keenest eyes had yet to uncover. What had brought him to Willowbrook? And why did his presence stir a storm that could either save or shatter them all? Days passed in Willowbrook with the slow rhythm of harvest and hearth. But for Sarah, each trip to the well became a heartbeat quickened by anticipation. She found herself arriving earlier, the morning mist curling around the fields like a whispered secret. And every time there he was, James, the man from the city, already there as if waiting just for her. James had an easy grace, the kind that made you forget the world's troubles, and a smile that held both warmth and mystery. Today, he wore a soft blue shirt, rolled casually at the sleeves, and dark trousers dusted with the village's familiar soil. Around his neck hung a simple leather cord with a small, carved wooden charm, nothing flashy, but somehow it suited him perfectly. "Morning, Sarah," he greeted, his voice low and steady, like a comforting song. "Morning," she replied, cheeks flushing, fingers fiddling with the hem of her faded dress, the one with the tiny floral pattern that had seen better days. Her shoes, scuffed but sturdy, tapped nervously against the stones. A silver locket hung around her neck, catching the early light, A gift from her mother long ago. James stepped forward, extending his hand to help with the bucket. Their fingers met again, and this time Sarah didn't pull away. Instead, she held on just a moment longer, savoring the warmth that spread from the touch. You know, James said with a teasing smile, if you keep making the bucket heavier, the well might file a complaint. Sarah laughed softly, a sound rare and precious in that house of shadows. I'm just making sure it's good exercise, a fitness enthusiast, he joked. I should have brought my running shoes. She looked up, meeting his eyes, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to tilt. The sky stretched wide above them, blue and endless, as if inviting them to dream. But then a sudden voice sliced through the moment. Sarah, what are you doing chatting with that city stranger again? It was Margaret, the middle sister, her tone sharp and wary. Her hands were stained with soil from the fields, and her face carried the hard lines of years spent under their father's strict hand. She wore a simple linen blouse and a long skirt, tied at the waist with a faded ribbon. Her eyes flicked between Sarah and James, suspicion burning bright. Sarah's heart sank. I was just getting water, she said quickly, pulling the bucket slightly behind her. James straightened, his smile fading for a fraction of a second. I didn't mean to cause trouble, he said gently. Margaret's gaze hardened. Father warned you. No one from the village, let alone some outsider, should distract you. Sarah swallowed, the weight of old fears pressing down. I'm sorry, she whispered. James glanced toward the village, then back at Sarah. Maybe I should go, he said softly, but there was a flicker of something, determination perhaps, that didn't quite fit the gentleman she'd come to know. No, Sarah said firmly, surprising herself. Stay. Margaret hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. But be careful. Father's temper is worse than the winter frost. As Margaret walked away, James turned to Sarah with a half smile. You're braver than you look, Sarah. Her cheeks warmed again. I've had to be. They stood together by the well, the sun climbing higher, casting long shadows that seemed to whisper of secrets yet to be told. In that quiet moment, Sarah felt the first stirrings of a rebellion, not just against her father's rule, but against the life she'd always been forced to accept. But beneath the calm surface, a storm was gathering. For James carried with him more than a city past. He harbored a secret that, if revealed, would shake the very foundations of Willowbrook. And as Sarah turned to leave, she caught sight of a figure watching from the edge of the village, the kind of gaze that didn't forget and wouldn't forgive. What was hidden in James's past? And who was the silent watcher waiting for the right moment to strike? The answers lay just beyond the horizon, where danger and desire entwined in a dance as old as time. That evening, the farmhouse felt heavier than usual. Shadows stretched long across the worn wooden floorboards as flickering candlelight cast trembling shapes on peeling wallpaper. Inside the cramped kitchen, Sarah sat quietly at the table, fingers nervously tracing the chipped rim of a tin cup. Her dress, a faded sea green with delicate lace trimming at the collar, hung loosely on her slender frame, a subtle contrast to the sturdy boots she wore, scuffed from countless walks to the well. A simple silver chain rested on her collarbone, catching the warm glow of the oil lamp. Margaret paced back and forth, her brows knitted in frustration, the lines of her face sharpened by years of suppressed anger. Her rough hands clenched and unclenched, the worn leather of her gloves creaking softly. Helen sat nearby, her dark hair pinned back with a plain wooden comb, eyes downcast as she worked silently on a small embroidery hoop, the needle moving with practiced patience but the tension in her jaw betraying her unease. Their father, Richard, sat slumped in the corner, a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey at his side. His grizzled beard was uneven, and his eyes, bloodshot from drink, flicked between his daughters like a hawk spotting prey. His voice when it came was low and rough. Sarah, he growled, what are you playing at? Wasting time with that stranger? Sarah swallowed hard, her heart pounding like a trapped bird. He just helps with the well, she said softly, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. Richard slammed his fist on the table, making the tin cup jump. No one helps you, girl. No one from the city comes here and changes what's ours. Margaret's eyes flashed with a dangerous light. You forget yourself, father, she snapped. Maybe she deserves more than this prison you built. Richard's face twisted in rage. Enough. You'll all obey. No man will touch you without my say. And that goes for you, Sarah. The room fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Sarah's gaze dropped to the floor, but inside a fire smoldered, one that no amount of harsh words could extinguish later. When the house finally settled into uneasy quiet, Sarah slipped out to the back porch. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant pine. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the soft wool brushing against her skin like a whispered promise. Above, the stars blinked cold and distant, but in her chest, a new light flickered. Her thoughts drifted back to James. The way his smile had softened even the hardest edges of her world, the gentle strength in his hands, the quiet patience that made her feel seen for the first time. She wondered what secrets he carried, what battles fought beneath that calm exterior. And she wondered, not for the first time, if he might be the key to her escape. A sudden rustle from the shadows made her start. From the darkness emerged a figure cloaked in a long dark coat, one she recognized with a thrill and a shiver. James. She breathed as he stepped forward into the pale moonlight, his eyes searching hers. "I didn't want to frighten you," he said quietly. "But there's something you need to know." Sarah's breath caught. "What is it?" He hesitated, the weight of his secret pressing down like winter snow. "I didn't come here by chance. There are people after me. And now by being near you, you're in danger too." She looked up at him, the cool night air swirling between them. "Then we face it together," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clutching at her heart. Attention hung heavy, a fragile thread stretched taut between hope and peril. As the wind whispered through the trees, Sarah knew that her life, and the fate of her sisters, was about to change forever. But as the first faint howl of a distant dog echoed through the village, neither of them noticed the shadow watching from the woods, the one whose eyes gleamed with cold intent and whose smile promised nothing but trouble. Who was this silent watcher, and what dark past was James running from? The next chapter of their story was about to begin, and with it, the line between safety and chaos would blur beyond recognition. The next morning dawned pale and gray over Willowbrook, the kind of day when the mist clings stubbornly to the fields and the air tastes faintly of rain. Sarah stood by the kitchen window, her reflection ghosted in the glass, fingers twisting the silver locket at her throat. She wore a soft cream blouse, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows, revealing slender wrists dusted with freckles. Her skirt, a muted shade of lavender, swayed gently around her calves, and her worn leather boots tapped nervously against the wooden floor. Margaret was already outside, her sturdy frame silhouetted against the rising sun as she tended the garden with precise, almost mechanical movements. Helen sat at the table stitching quietly, the delicate embroidery contrasting sharply with the tension etched across her face. Sarah's thoughts were tangled with the night's revelations. James's warning had unsettled her deeply. Who were these people chasing him? Why had he fled to their isolated village? The questions swirled like autumn leaves caught in a restless wind. A sharp knock at the door broke her reverie. Heart quickening, she opened it to find James standing on the porch, his dark eyes shadowed but resolute. He wore a well-worn jacket over a crisp shirt, the collar slightly rumpled as if he'd traveled far and fast. "Morning," he said, voice low but steady. "I need to talk. It's about the man watching us." Sarah swallowed. "The one in the woods?" He nodded grimly. "His name's Collins. He's been following me since I left the city. Dangerous man. If he's here, it means he's closing in." She stepped aside to let him in, the creak of the door sounding louder than usual in the stillness. "We can't let him hurt anyone here," she said firmly. James glanced at her, a flicker of something tender in his gaze. "That's why I came back. To warn you and your sisters. You don't have to be prisoners anymore." For a moment the weight of her life, the years of darkness and silence, pressed down. Then beneath it a spark ignited. A fierce determination to fight for freedom, for love, for a future beyond the walls that had caged her. As they spoke in hushed tones, plotting their next move, a shadow slipped through the village unseen and silent. Collins had arrived, and with him, the calm of Willowbrook began to fracture. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it a whisper that promised upheaval and secrets long buried. Sarah felt the pull of destiny tightening around her like a noose, and yet, somewhere deep inside, a voice dared to hope. The question lingered in the heavy air. Would the sisters break free, or would the darkness swallow them whole? And somewhere, just beyond the edge of the village, Collins smiled. A cold, cruel smile that promised the storm was only beginning. That afternoon, the village of Willowbrook seemed unusually still, as if holding its breath beneath a heavy, clouded sky. Sarah stood at the edge of the garden, her fingers entwined nervously around the hem of her soft, pale blue dress. The fabric fluttered gently in the breeze, revealing glimpses of her calves wrapped in worn stockings, and the delicate curve of her ankle encased in scuffed brown leather boots. A simple pendant hung from her neck, resting just above the modest neckline. A small symbol of hope she refused to let go. James was beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. His dark jacket was dusted with soil from the fields, and a faint crease marked his forehead, betraying the worry beneath his calm exterior. He reached out, brushing a stray lock of Sarah's chestnut hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering a moment longer than necessary. "We can't stay here much longer," James said quietly, his voice barely above the rustle of leaves. "Collins is waiting for the right moment. He knows this village better than we do." Sarah looked up, meeting his gaze. The warmth in his eyes was a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. "Then we need a plan. For my sisters, for my mother, for all of us." Behind the house, Margaret appeared carrying a basket of freshly picked vegetables. Her rough hands and sun-beaten face contrasted sharply with the delicate embroidery pinned to her blouse, a silent rebellion against a life she'd long endured. Helen followed, her dark eyes flickering with a mix of fear and resolve. "We're ready," Margaret said firmly, setting the basket down. No more waiting as the three sisters gathered. The room filled with a quiet strength, a bond forged through years of shared hardship and silent yearning. They spoke in hushed tones, weaving together a fragile hope against the looming threat. But outside, unseen by them, the figure of Collins moved like a shadow, his eyes cold and calculating. He paused at the edge of the woods, a cruel smile curling his lips as he spoke into a cracked radio. "They're planning to run. Not on my watch." The air grew thick with tension, the calm before the storm. Sarah's hand found James's, their fingers entwining, a silent promise amidst the gathering darkness. As twilight fell, casting long shadows over the fields, the sisters prepared to step into a world unknown, one where freedom and danger danced hand in hand. And somewhere beyond the hills, the first echoes of confrontation stirred, setting the stage for a reckoning that would change their lives forever. The night wrapped Willowbrook in a thick velvet darkness, broken only by the faint glow of the farmhouse's lone candle flickering through a cracked window. Inside, the air was heavy with whispered plans and pounding hearts. Sarah stood by the worn wooden table, her fingers tracing the delicate embroidery on her pale lavender dress. Soft fabric that seemed almost too fragile for the storm gathering outside and within her soul. Her boots, dusty from the day's work, tapped a restless rhythm on the creaky floorboards. Around her neck, the silver locket caught the candlelight, a small, shining beacon amid uncertainty. James moved quietly beside her, his broad shoulders tense beneath his dark jacket. The lines etched deep into his face spoke of battles fought long before he'd ever set foot in this quiet village. His hand reached out, brushing Sarah's gently, grounding her in the moment. "We leave at first light," he said softly, voice barely more than a breath. "There's a path through the woods, less traveled but safer." Sarah nodded, swallowing the knot of fear tightening in her throat. "And my sisters?" Margaret's voice cut through the silence, firm and resolute. Clad in a worn but sturdy dress, her hands calloused from years of toil, she stood by the door, eyes sharp and unwavering. "They're ready. No more chains." Helen, sitting near the window, her dark hair loosely pinned back, looked up from her stitching. Her usual quiet was replaced by a steady determination. "We'll stick together. Whatever comes." Outside, the wind whispered secrets through the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and impending rain. Somewhere in the shadows, Collins watched, his cold gaze piercing the night. A cruel smile played on his lips as he prepared to close the net. As the sisters gathered their few belongings, the weight of years spent in silence and fear pressed against them, but so did a fierce hope, a promise of freedom, of new beginnings. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of life within her, a secret flame growing stronger each day. With James by her side and her sisters close, she stepped into the darkness, ready to face whatever awaited beyond the edges of Willowbrook. But somewhere, just beyond the trees, the soft crunch of footsteps echoed, a reminder that the past was never far behind, and the night held dangers yet unseen. Their journey had begun, and with it, a battle not only for freedom but for the very souls they had long kept hidden. The pale light of dawn seeped through the cracks in the farmhouse walls, casting long trembling shadows over the packed belongings resting in a battered wicker basket. Sarah stood by the door, her fingers trembling slightly as she adjusted the faded shawl around her shoulders. Her dress, a soft cream with delicate embroidery along the cuffs, was simple but carefully chosen. the fabric flowing just enough to hint at the gentle curves she was only starting to recognize in herself. Her boots, well-worn but sturdy, rested firmly on the cold wooden floor, grounding her as the weight of what lay ahead pressed down. James waited quietly outside, his silhouette framed by the rising sun. His jacket hung open, revealing a muted green shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms marked by faint scars, proof of a life far from peaceful. His dark hair, streaked with silver at the temples, caught the first light, and his eyes held the steady calm of a man who had faced storms before. Margaret and Helen emerged from the house, their faces set with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. Margaret's strong hands gripped a small bundle of tools and provisions, while Helen carried a cloth-wrapped package of cherished mementos, small tokens of a past life about to be left behind. As the four sisters gathered, James stepped forward, his voice low but resolute. "The path through the woods is rough, but it will keep us hidden. We must move quickly before Collins realizes we're leaving." Sarah's gaze met his, a flicker of trust sparking between them. Together, she whispered the word of vow. The group set off, their footsteps muffled by the damp earth and fallen leaves. The forest closed around them like a protective cloak, the tall oaks and whispering pines shielding their secret escape. The cool morning air was tinged with the scent of moss and wildflowers, a stark contrast to the heavy, stifling atmosphere they had left behind. Yet the danger was never far. From the shadows, Collins watched with narrowed eyes, his breath visible in the chill. He stepped forward, voice rough and cold. "They think they can outrun me. But in these woods I am the hunter." As the sisters pressed onward, hearts pounding with hope and fear, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Every rustle, every snapped twig was a reminder that freedom was a fragile thing, one that could be shattered in an instant. And so beneath the gray morning sky their journey began. Not just away from a prison of silence and control, but toward a future uncertain, where love, courage, and secrets would collide in ways none could yet imagine. The forest embraced them in its cool, shadowed arms as Sarah and her sisters moved swiftly beneath the canopy, the soft crunch of fallen leaves muffling their footsteps. Sarah's dress, now tucked carefully beneath a sturdy woolen cloak, brushed against the undergrowth, the delicate lace at her collar just visible beneath the folds. Her boots, scuffed and mud-streaked, carried her forward with a mixture of determination and trembling hope. A simple silver ring, a keepsake from her mother, rested on her finger, a quiet talisman against the unknown. James led the way, his broad frame weaving confidently through the dense trees. His dark eyes scanned the path ahead, alert for any sign of pursuit. His shirt, damp with morning dew, clung to his lean torso, hinting at the strength beneath. Occasionally he glanced back, offering Sarah a reassuring smile that ignited a warmth deep within her chest. Margaret brought up the rear, her hands gripping a worn leather satchel filled with essentials. Her face, weathered and resolute, held a fierce protectiveness that seemed to shield them all. Helen, silent but steady, moved with careful grace, the embroidery hoop she'd carried now safely tucked away, replaced by a small satchel slung across her shoulder. The forest was alive with whispers, the rustle of birds, the murmur of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze, but beneath the beauty lurked tension. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret, every crack of a twig a warning. Sarah's breath hitched when she caught sight of a dark figure lurking just beyond the tree line. Collins. His eyes gleamed with cold calculation, and a cruel smile played at his lips as he motioned to two rough-looking men emerging behind him. "We're closing in," he muttered, voice low and menacing. James stiffened, gripping a small, concealed knife at his belt. "Stay close," he whispered to Sarah, his voice steady but urgent. The sisters exchanged a glance, fear mingling with fierce resolve. Ahead, the path forked, a narrow, winding trail veering toward the river, and a broader, more exposed route leading back toward the village. James pointed toward the river path. "This way. It's riskier terrain, but fewer will follow." They moved faster, the damp earth slippery beneath their feet as branches scraped against cloaks and skin. Sarah's heart pounded, not just from exertion, but from the raw thrill of breaking free, of choosing her own fate for the first time. As they neared the riverbank, the water roared softly beneath a fallen log, its surface shimmering with early morning light. Sarah paused, the cool mist kissing her face, and for a moment, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a new life, one filled with light, laughter, and love. But behind them, the shadows stirred, and the chase was far from over. The question hung heavy in the air. Would their courage be enough to outrun the darkness closing in? And somewhere, hidden in the folds of the forest, secrets waited. Secrets that would test their bonds and challenge everything they thought they knew about. Trust, sacrifice, and the cost of freedom. The river's edge was slick with moss and scattered stones, the water rushing cold and relentless beneath the early light. Sarah's boots slipped once, then steadied as James reached out, steadying her with a firm but gentle grip. Her breath caught, not from the cold but from the closeness of him, the way his hand brushed hers like a silent promise. Her dress, tucked beneath her cloak, clung damply to her legs, the lace cuff peeking out just enough to remind her of the fragile woman she was becoming, stronger, braver, yet still tender beneath it all. The scent of pine and wet earth mingled with the faint, comforting aroma of James's cologne, a subtle reminder of the world beyond Willowbrook's suffocating walls. Margaret and Helen moved swiftly behind them, their faces set with determination. Margaret's rough hands clenched a makeshift walking stick. Helen's eyes scanned the tree-line nervously, her fingers tightening around the strap of her satchel. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the trees, a snapped branch under heavy boots. Sarah's heart leapt as the shadows between the trees shifted, and Collins emerged, flanked by his 2 men. His cold gaze locked onto James with a predator's intensity. "Well, well," Collins sneered. "Running won't save you." James stepped forward, placing himself between the sisters and their pursuers. "We don't want trouble," he said evenly. "But we won't back down." Collins laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the morning stillness. "You don't get to choose, city boy. This land has rules." Sarah's pulse thundered in her ears as she took a steadying breath. The river roared beside them, a wild, untamed force echoing the turmoil in her soul. James's hand found hers again, fingers weaving through hers with quiet strength. "Whatever comes," he whispered, "we face it together." The air crackled with tension, the delicate balance between hope and danger teetering on the edge. Sarah felt the weight of years of silence and fear pressing down, and beneath it, the fierce fire of freedom burning brighter than ever. As Collins advanced, a sudden shout rang out from the woods, a sharp bark, a rush of movement, and suddenly figures emerged from the shadows. Villagers armed and resolute, led by none other than Margaret's husband, a man with a stern face and a steady gaze. "Leave them be," he commanded, voice firm and unwavering. "This is their fight now." Collins hesitated, the tide turning. With a final glare, he backed away into the trees, his men following reluctantly, breath heaving. Sarah looked at her sisters, at James, at the faces of those who had chosen to stand by them. For the first time, the dawn felt like a promise, not just of escape but of a new beginning, and as the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light over the river, Sarah knew their story was far from over. Behind the victory lay mysteries still to unravel, and choices that would test the bonds of love, loyalty, and courage. But for now they had won a moment of peace, a fragile, shining hope in the heart of the wild. The soft glow of morning bathed the forest in a gentle light as Sarah and her sisters stood by the rushing river, catching their breath and gathering their scattered hopes. Her dress, now damp from the river's mist, clung softly to her slender frame, the delicate lace at the collar hinting at a quiet grace beneath the fierce determination. Her boots, muddied but firm, rooted her to the earth, a symbol of the new life she was beginning to claim. James stood close, his presence steady and reassuring. His dark eyes, sharp and kind all at once, never left hers. The faint scent of pine and earth clung to him, blending with the warmth that radiated from his touch when their fingers brushed. A silent promise that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. Margaret's strong hands steadied a walking stick. Her face softened for a moment as she watched her sisters, the weight of years lifting slightly from her shoulders. Helen, usually so quiet, smiled softly, the tension in her eyes easing. For the first time in decades behind them, the village began to stir. A few familiar faces appearing at the edge of the trees, their expressions a mix of curiosity and cautious hope. The news of their daring escape had spread quickly, and whispers of rebellion fluttered through Willowbrook like a fresh breeze. But as Sarah looked out over the water, her heart clenched with a sudden unease. Somewhere beneath the calm surface of the river, secrets churned, secrets tied to James's past and the shadowy figure of Collins, whose retreat was only temporary. A sudden rustle from the underbrush snapped her attention back to the present. James tensed, eyes narrowing toward the darkening woods. "We're not safe yet," he warned softly. Sarah nodded, gripping his hand tighter. "Then we keep moving." The path ahead was uncertain, winding through wild forests and open fields, But for the first time, the sisters walked it with their heads held high, free from the chains of fear and silence. Yet, as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows, a new mystery awaited. One that would test their courage and bind their fates in ways they could never have imagined. And far beyond the hills, in a hidden corner of the village, a pair of eyes watched silently, a smile playing at the lips, waiting for the moment to strike. The story was far from over. The true journey, with all its passion, danger, and secrets, was just beginning.